Hello, thank you for having me. As already mentioned, the original talk was the most boring talk of Republica 17 in Berlin, and that's because it's taxation. And normally taxation by itself, even I normally fall asleep. And we try to bridge here three issues, three cities, and the one is a German perspective, which was in Berlin. Now we're going to the epicenter of tax evasion or optimization in Europe, to Dublin. And then the third part will be in Thessaloniki, which is basically like suffering through tax evasion, where it's most obvious, since if somebody doesn't pay tax, either somebody else has to pay the tax or you have to cut down services, which somebody else would call austerity. So this should be the bigger bridge between the three cities or topics, and briefly explain how we got there and go through them through this worldwide issue. And I'm from Austria, so sometimes I reference there. My colleagues, which presented the talk in Berlin, were also from Austria. We are spread around. Max is an economist in Harvard, so the detailed stuff comes from him. And Dani is running a political organization in Austria dealing with taxation issues. And so the original talk was three parts. So the first one is my intro, which are fun examples, and it's really bad slides, eye cancer slides, as I call them. And the purpose of them is to not make you fall asleep and show you the example what's happening on tax evasion. The second part is then normally from Max, a brief history, how we got here, why did that happen, and what are the reasons, and what can be done. And then the third part is then politics, what needs to be done to change that. So I will start with my part, how I ended up being interested about taxation. And basically it started with an example from ExxonMobil, which is the sixth largest company by market cap or revenue. When I was reading an article years ago that one employee over 2 years on an annual salary of 44,000 euro made 9.9 billion euro net profit. And if you see that number and think about that number, just the 9.9 billion net profit, it's amazing even for best hedge fund managers or Bill Gates or high flyers. Making that over 2 years is outstanding, really outstanding, and then also just getting 44,000 euros out of it. So I came up with the term, it's the Stakhanov of capitalism. Like that's the biggest high performer problem in history of like one single person making more money for somebody else. I don't know who he is. I tried to find out. So I called him John Doe from Spain. He's probably just an accountant or lawyer. It doesn't work like pretty much. It's like a shell company in Spain for ExxonMobil. And so this is just one of the examples which demonstrates like how tax optimization or evasion is done. And we're talking here about a lot of money, what we in Germany call like a Batzen Geld, or in English, a lot of dough. And there's the funny saying, a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. And that's like the league. And another saying is there are only two things in life which are certain, death and taxes. But we also wanted to point out the third one, and that's inequality. And we think we should address that issue, inequality, reducing inequality. And normally everybody can agree on it that the taxes are too damn high. What taxes normally are doing, they help funding services. So whatever it is, like transportation, school, education, healthcare sector, and so on, somewhere the money has to be raised. And you can see it, I think it's important to point it out that it's a framing issue because normally paying taxes has a bad rep. And you could also see that you're contributing something to the society. And there you have this graph, like what do you do with when you raise taxes, what is the outcome of it, where you spend it. And that's basically a discussion, a political discussion, also for the society, not just a numbers game, and has real effects. So when we're talking about increase, where we will be, if you cut down on the healthcare sector, that means that people literally like dying earlier than they normally would die like a few years ago. So that's not just what this will be like. It will be a number slot fest, but that's like affects real people in the real life at one end or the other end. And the one big thing to point out, so you have a tax revenue base, and if you have person A paying taxes, person B paying back taxes, and then person C paying taxes, if the person C or corporation decreases the tax base, then either you have decreased tax revenue or others pay more. And that's just always, it's obvious if you know math, but it's, you always should keep in mind when the numbers are popping up afterwards in the examples, those numbers go somewhere and somebody else has to step in for them or somebody else takes a hit for them. So one other thing is in this talk, which is important, we're talking here about legal tax evasion or optimization and not illegal. There's a lot of illegal stuff going on, like in Germany you had Cum-Ex, you have the Panama Papers, which were pretty famous, you have Swiss tax Beifahn, and so on. But the thing is like what comes now, this stuff is legal. So it's like basically they're completely operating in the framework, and that's why normally I get a little bit more unhappy about that. And the famous saying from Barack Obama was that a lot of this is legal, but that's exactly the problem. So we want to raise awareness to that it shouldn't be legal. And there's the saying, legal, illegal, scheißegal. For those who doesn't understand German, legal and illegal should be clear, and scheißegal means I don't give a fucking fly about it. And normally, so this is like the finance ministers from Germany, you have Juncker from the EC, European Commission, and I guess the guy in Ireland is currently called Donohoe, if I'm correct. And why we need this discussion? Because we have certain transformations going on right now, and one of them is that the so-called saying software is eating the world, or we have like a digitizations, AIs are moving in, as you can see on the right side there. So that will further accelerate the problem is like where to get the money, or where to raise tax bases for a healthcare sector, since you will have probably like less people employed and so on, and universal basic income or universal basic outcome is on the table. But I think that has to be addressed because this is the trend. So we have here what is the corporate income tax as share of the GDP from 46 to 2009, and as you can see on both here, it's like the actual tax rate, it's a downward slope. And it even accelerated like somewhere here in this area in the 80s. And some say that multiple factors on it. The one is that you don't have so strong unions. The one is like the starting of globalization. The other one is like the financialization of the economics. But this is pretty, whatever you would say, it's like here 2% and up it was 5%. So it's like per year 3% of the GDP, it's gone. That means per year that amount of money less for, let's say, schools or hospitals. And it's clear that for the corporate taxes, the basic rule is like the less profit, the less taxes you pay, and you pay where the rate is the lowest. So when you talk about like this optimization of taxes, I almost try to bring into the point of view that think about hacking. That you have like, it's hacking the tax code, and you have like basically a hacker team working 24/7 around the clock for accounting firms, trying to make sure that the corporations are paying as less as possible taxes, which, as I said before, is completely legal. And those are like one of the best-known hacking teams. And coming back to Republika slide, so there's a lot of cyber going on in this. And it's a lot of, though, this is the number which the US is currently, that's 2 trillion, or in German Billiarde, having overseas money waiting to come back to their tax base, and it increases each year by 60 billion. That's the scorecard of that game. And we have estimates from the European Commission that it's between 50 billion and 70 billion a year in Europe what we're missing out on taxes from the deviation. So when you think about that in Austrian term, that's like a sixth of a schnitzel of Austria. It's also roughly a sixth of a Irish GDP. So that means like roughly 2 months for every Irish person. They're working a year for free or don't get anything paid. To bring that in perspective, because of that tax optimization scenes. And the OECD called that egregious. That says pretty much a lot, I think. And why is this happening? One part of it is because within like the internet or the increase of digitization, the intangible goods versus the real goods are increased. And intangible goods are like intellectual property, patents, think about search algorithm from Google, trademarks, logos, and so on. And those are easier to shift around. So when you had in the back days, if you have a car factory is like, has to be at some point a plant, and to move it from A to B it's quite complicated. A server farm or just like some software code goes pretty easy. And you can see in this graph what changed over the years. So this was from March this year, the stock market, which companies had the highest valuation. And what you can see here, blue is basically technology companies. 11 years ago, you only had like one technology company in there, and the other were like energy, banking, energy, and industry. So this basically accelerates the whole thing with intangible goods, or makes like the question even bigger, because ExxonMobil as the core asset had to transport the oil somewhere, and it was easier to get a grip of it. And since we're here, one of these famous tax holes, it's called like the double Irish Dutch sandwich. And it's an ongoing scheme how to transfer money around. I use this Chinese version because normally for, I think, the average person, it looks like something like that. It doesn't make a difference if it's Chinese or German or English. So the deal is basically you have like normally one American company who has some assets or a search algorithm or patents, and then they transfer it over to various countries. Normally involves like Bahamas and Ireland and the Netherlands, where you transfer money on because of certain tax loopholes, they pay less taxes. That's the short version of it. So it's normally this always looks like the same. And I wanted to point out, being here in Ireland, that's not a criticism of like Ireland, because every other country does it well. I will have examples from other countries. And it's also not just that it's the US tech companies, that's SAP. And if you want to make a joke, that's the only German real worldwide big IT company. And they're also doing the same trick with having Irish subsidies in here for reducing the amount of money they have to pay for taxes. So, but basically, every tech company does it, and it's also like gaps and other international corporations into that game. And with Google, we could easily explain it on a nicer chart. How is this done? So you have Google, when you go down, they have worldwide a revenue of 46 billion. And the UK share of this is like 4.6. So you could say it's roughly like 10%. But if you take a look like how much taxes they paid, so they paid like 2.3 and they ended with 30 million. So there's a huge discrepancy like how it should be proportionate. And this is then the indicator like that somewhere the money spent in the UK was transferred somewhere else for tax optimization. And that's like a scheme roughly how the money gets routed around. And if you're wondering why there are peanuts, it's because when you have a tax rate from 2.4 as Google, you save every year billions. And then it's pretty easily that you have like with the digital news initiative that you spend like 150 million on news organizations to create a technology. And it's also important because a few days ago there was like this controversy where again it was found out that Google was looking after the interest and fired or not, but we're happy that somebody who worked at the think tank pointing out that the European Union was kicking the ass of Google. We're not happy about it. So this is what's happening if you have a lot of money. I mean, you defend it and you do things you shouldn't probably do, and the two numbers, if you compare them, makes the peanuts. And the same goes with Apple. So Apple has around $250 billion cash sitting around because it can't get it back to the US. And in their best time, they had like a tax rate in Europe from 0.005%, where on the paper, it's normally somewhere up to like, should be somewhere 30%. So this equivalent of what Apple has in cash is, again, it's like 2/3 of the GDP from Austria. It's like 2/3 of the debt from Greece. Or it's roughly around a little bit less than 2/3 of the GDP from Ireland. So that's just like 5-6 months, 7-8 months of Irish people have to work to have like that amount of money laying around. And that cash pile is basically sitting somewhere because they can't get it back, because if they bring it back to the US, then they have to pay the capital tax there. So that's like not revenue, because that's way bigger. And so you have a little beef between Apple, Ireland, the European Commission, and the USA, because who gets like a big chunk of that money? And currently it's standing, as far as I know, it's like the European Commission asked Ireland to make Apple pay like 19 billion euros. Ireland, because of their industry politics, said they don't want to do it, and Apple, of course, doesn't want to do it because then they lose the money. But that's currently the score, and has to be resolved sooner or later. And 2014 in Ireland, they scraped the so-called double Irish tax loophole. That meant that like everybody who is currently using that tax loophole, it will be running out by 2020, which at the first time it was like a big woohoo, finally gone, and Bambi, the shy capital, had to go somewhere else. But then it turned out that like at the same time, they let it run out, that they replaced it with something called knowledge box, which is basically just patent box and the same loophole again under different name. And so it will go on. A lot of jobs in Ireland are depending on that, but that's basically just relabeling it and changing a few parameters. And to go to another country, that's one of the examples from Europe. There's 3 countries involved. That was Hungary, Netherlands, and Switzerland. And with countries, I mean like companies residing in that company. And it was like shortly before Christmas 2015, where they sold at 12 o'clock a company for 40,000 Swiss francs, which doesn't sound that much. And then like on the same day, an hour later, the same company got sold like for 6 billion. So we're talking about like 60 minutes and the fact of like 160,000, which is, I'm impressed by things like that, just because the numbers are so crazy. It cracks me up, although it's really bad. And so I think like this and Sachnov just shows like how bad this game is. And this is like just a few examples which are then like public. So you have the reason why you do stuff like that is because you're moving around the companies. You can see that here from the 3 countries. You have like somewhere tax loophole. And then it happens that you pay instead of 18.6% tax rate, only 2%, and it makes different from 1.4 billion. And that's it's a nice tax hack. It's like somebody where you almost appreciate or admire like how much thought went into this game. So there are like many more examples. For example, IKEA, Luxembourg, which it's the hilarious point that Juncker, who is the current head of the European Commission, basically made that tax loophole years ago when he was the prime minister. But I don't want to bore you and then go on like what can be done from my point of view. There's certain initiatives which try to bring in as much as transparency as possible. So the one is open ownership. That would be important to have that for company registers, so you know who is the beneficial owner of that company when some money is flowing. This is a EITI for Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. There should be the whole payments made visible. And this is the chain link, because in some countries you have better transparency, as in Germany. And because Germany is lacking the transparency, companies are residing in Germany. And when journalists from the Ukraine are trying to find out what's going on with their companies who are doing shaky businesses, basically run into a wall in Germany because the data is not available. So as I said in the beginning, this is a worldwide effort, and it should be really like made transparent. And it's important to see that although there's a race to the bottom, in general it will help all of the countries avoiding that. So then that's the summary of it. It's a lot of dough, huge numbers. And the second part is a quick overview how we got there. So we had, since 1920s, 3 different kinds of tax treatments. And the first one is so-called the source country-based. Back in the days when you had a car factory, you paid the taxes on the profit where the factory was. Then the second one, since the society got more complicated and you had then, let's say, a car factory using parts from Austria, and you had then to put the car with different parts together and also calculate it. That was then the arm's length pricing. And then the third one was like bilateral treaties. That means like between one single country with another single country. And that worked pretty well till the point when you had like these intangible assets which were moving around quicker. And so source country based. It was like corporations owe the tax where the production happening, and then due that they're produced in different countries, you had arm length pricing, and this is the companies in that were then treated as a national subsidies and independently. And what here was the assumption when you buy a car part from Austria, putting into a German car, that the car part has like a price tag on the market. So you could figure out like what's it, probably a tire worth. And everybody knew roughly around what it is. What's happening with these intangible assets, the problem is you don't know how much it is really worth, right? You have like a Google search algorithm. You can charge whatever you want for your subsidies because nobody can tell you, take another one, because it's their in-house stuff. You had that stuff with Starbucks when you have if you run a Starbucks coffee shop, you pay like a certain percentage just for using a logo. And that's actually really high, but nobody can tell it's like only half worth it because there's only one logo. So that's the whole problem with this, what used to be this pricing mechanism for intermediate goods between countries, which doesn't work in the digital age anymore. So then quickly, why do they create problems? So in the first one, the corporations had the incentive to move the production away, like from Germany to Austria to Czech Republic or somewhere where it's cheaper. With arm length pricing, the problem is even bigger because they can make up the prices. They don't even have to move physically anymore. They just say like our algorithm or our trademark or our logo is a double worth or even more like that. And then bilateral treaties, there you just throw in a bunch of lawyers who are smart and let them try to figure out how to make the best tax loophole. And that will probably always work because some of them tax codes law written, as we know from Germany, are actually created by lawyers. And those who write in the law itself will know how to exploit it. So that's the quick summary of what's happening there. That's like the items to move around. So we have the reasons what's going on right now, making up prices to shift profits via accounting. That's the arm length pricing, a move actual production, that's the source-based. And then this two actually causing that you have tax competition between countries. And that's actually then a bigger thing because what's starting then is like you have a race to the bottom. So in order to attract companies, every country is like lowering the taxes like you had in Austria with Slovakia. Here's an example from starting from the 8-twist. That's two countries. So you have like Germany, which is the blue one, which starts out like at 60% and then actually goes down to 30. Over like 30 years, you drop almost half the tax rate for companies. And then the second one is Ireland, which started below Germany, around 50, and which is now at 12.5%. That's why it makes it the first step. So incredible lucrative for company to move to Ireland. Next to that, they speak English and so on and so on. But that's basically, you see that worldwide, that trend. In order to attract headquarters and companies, you lower the corporate tax rate. So this, where we're standing here, there will be some piece missing in the cake. Oops, that was. So that part will just missing in the cake and gone somewhere else. And so what can be done about that? On the technical side, there is actually several proposals up there, even some from the European Commission, which are not that bad, but the best one from our experience so far is a sales-based appropriation. And what does that mean? So basically you say to a company, how big is your global profit and how much of this global sales happened in that country. And you multiply the two numbers, and that's basically like then the baseline for the number you calculate the tax on. And then each country also can say like how high that should be. And the other beauty about this one, once you could start that each country by themselves without any further increment, and there's not much corporations could do about that because you can't move the customers around. I mean, there's still technical things that you buy something online and so on, but from the defending the mechanism, this is, I think, the most solid one at that point. Oh God, Then the third part would be how do we get there? And I keep that short because I don't want to lecture anybody, but basically, there's another image coming up. Since we're in Ireland, so that you can pray, and you can pray that praying works. So this is like actually the image from 60 years of Europe with the Pope. And so this guy is basically in the background would have to do something to make that on a European scale better. They're also running normally local offices as politicians. And the other thing next to praying you can do is laugh. I remember that Anglo tapes, I don't know from the Irish people who know that one, which was a complete clusterfuck. So maybe it's in the next talk then. They caught some banker who got a bailout from the government on the phone records, how A, they got the money, and B, how he was talking then to his colleagues, how he fucked them over to get I think it was 7 billion, and he put the numbers out of his ass, and they knew at the time they got the money that the money will be gone the next day, literally, and but still made a shitload of money for themselves, and I think they don't even went to jail as far as I remember. So that's basically, I like that image because that's a classic one. There you have Reagan, this is Bush Senior, and every time when you think about taxes or something like with economics or like housing market, you should have either pray or laugh about it, because that's the only way I can cope with that. And it makes you grumpy, and that you need that because so the other thing is you should remember that. So we're talking about it's €100 for each European citizen per year, which is gone there. And so it's not that much. When you talk about Ireland, and we would say it's only an Irish problem, that's basically €10,000 per each Irish citizen. That means from the toddler till the grandma. And that has to remember, because it's easy money gone away, which could be way more useful spent. And it's not just that you lose this €100 on the one side. This €100 goes also into somewhere which caused another effects. When you have a housing bubble starting, it's somewhere money which is not spent that well or comes from somewhere in, and that's probably always that kind of money, because corporate taxes goes to those who have normally stocks from companies. So you have a big wealth transfer. And last time I tried to make the joke, so for everybody who in this room can either burn the €100 or spend it for some other stupid things to maybe feel more bad how that hurts. So maybe 100 is not that much for everybody. And the normal stuff is then you should support the local, regional, national investigative journalists, politicians and parties, or members to the European Parliament, NGOs and campaigns who actually work in that field and try to make it public, and try to get a better law to at least minimize it. I mean, there's no doubt that this will be ever solved, because it's an ongoing game for centuries. And so the takeaway is things are changing. That's the intangible goods. 3 ways companies pay less taxes. That you showed, it's moving around, selling stuff which is not that easy to track, and having good lawyers. And then once they do that, somebody has to pay the bill instead of them. And so then the last point is up to you to change something. And you can even make the choice by buying which company is less tax evasive than the others. And that's it. So laugh out loud, love taxes, and love Europe, and thank you, Dublin. I think we have now
And thank you, Walter. We have some time for questions. I'm sure everybody's mind is boggled. First of all, I have to give you a compliment, because this idea of creating retro, ugly slides to capture everybody's attention totally worked, and I also found it very entertaining and very thought through the entire presentation, so congrats for that. Any questions? You can give me a sign of hands. I'll be glad to come over. I think okay, there's one up there. No, but the people in the stream won't be able to hear you, so just give me a sec. And it gives me a bit of chance to exercise, so.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for the talk and the presentation. Obviously, at the heart of it is also the political system. And you just said or mentioned that we should reach out to probably only local politicians, because they are not as much able to influence the larger political and legal framework. How should we engage, or how should we tackle the political side of the problem? Because the companies, they're just one part of the equation, right?
No, so the one thing is on this one, basically, it starts always, I think, local, but you also go regional, national, or here like members to the European Parliament. So certain things on that scale you can't do. You can only do on a national level. Below that, you can't get a grip on corporations because you have a national tax code. And then the other thing is, I think it works if somebody would put pressure on certain companies. I think in Germany was a campaign with Star Bucket Challenge, which was a joke of Ice Bucket Challenge, and companies then at least trying to pretend that they're aware of it and so on, and moving forward or raising that topic. I thought that after the financial crisis, this issue will be solved sooner, since there's a lot of money missing. Unfortunately, it did not. I can't explain it, but I still believe that you have to try to put the pressure up, and you have in the European Parliament really good members who would tackle it. Unfortunately, they are like from parties who are like not in the majority. So just supporting them, or even like we try with friends in Austria, for example, writing then letters to the editor and pointing out like this is a company who is like in Austria way below anything, and it's just not right, because it used to be that you have the more money you have, the more responsibility you have, and you got the prestige of having a lot of money because they also take a lot of opportunity or responsibility for your society. That used to be like what's nowadays is like this entrepreneurial hype. It used to be that Unternehmer, it takes care about that, like in a sense of stakeholder value system about his employees. So it's like a captain of the boat, and when the boat sinks, he's the last one who gets off. And this is, I think, completely gone in the last decade. So nowadays, the CEO is the first one to jump the ship. And this has to be just, I think it has to do a lot with framing, like in the debates when you have the death tax, if you should tax inheritance, that it's called now death tax was on purpose. So you have to come up with other things, and I think there's like having responsibility and taking care of like your surroundings as a company or as a nation on your education and health system has to be framed like that. That would be my guess, and needs just people who make us think about it or raise it out or address it. And I know there are a lot of other issues which are maybe more important than that stuff, but it's like a slow erosion what you have over the years, since 30 years, which are causing really bad long-term effect, especially like in health or education.
You have a follow-up question? No, wait for me.
You just mentioned, because I'm under the impression we should slightly increase the blame and shame game with regards to the politicians, and you alluded to Mr. Juncker, and it doesn't really seem to hurt him, because if you think about local politicians, they are within their organization themselves, right? They have incentives, and if they're very ambitious, then at some point they probably buy into the culture of their organizations, which is the political system. So I think we as citizens should really encourage them to rethink their organizational structure as well as their career path, because if it doesn't change at the top, if we don't enforce via, publicly being a bit more observant, if we don't change that part of the society, we can't expect that companies themselves will just be good or become good corporate citizens just because consumers wanted to be that way. Because to me, politicians are a big part of the equation, and we have to find more ways to blame individuals.
They're definitely part of the equation, and I always said like I'm amazed that you had industries who were running around and telling you before the financial crisis how efficient and how great and so on they were working, and then they got like a state bailout because they basically fucked up so badly that without the state bailout they would like complete go belly up. And then after 2 years, they were coming around again and telling the same things they were telling before with the bailout they got. And then you just have to step up and saying, like, you're like a social funding project. I mean, you can discuss if you want to have capitalism or not. That's one thing. But once you agree on it that you want to be a capitalist, and there's one simple rule, and that is like you take a risk. If it goes up, you get a gain. And if it goes down, you take the loss. And if you're like in that league of not taking the loss, then you should just shut the fuck up. No, that's the game. I mean, you go into a game, that's the rule, and you have to stick to the rule, and that's it. And you have to point at everybody who basically says then like he's like a capitalist but needs like state money. And I'm like, I don't know what you're smoking. No, that has to be like addressed for the framing in the society. I think that would be important, because that leaves like a lot of I don't know how to describe them around, who still like running around, who blew up companies really bad, who brought like damage to neighborhoods or societies, and they're still like considered entrepreneurs. No, you're not. You take the loss. When you take the loss and you basically broke and say, yeah, well, I fucked up, then we can talk about it, but not living on a system which is designed that you get a bailout because you're promising something you can't deliver.
I just started thinking, as you were saying all these things about responsible entrepreneurship directed at large corporations. I was on a panel yesterday in Berlin where we were discussing about the sort of policies making entrepreneurship difficult for startup companies in Germany in particular, but internationally also. And a lot of the positions on the panel were saying how difficult it is in Germany to fail with a company and how we need to make frameworks for more serial entrepreneurs. So this idea that, very much moving away from this kind of traditional economy of a family-owned company, or a company where the owner would be sort of proud for generations to rule this company, but rather moving into this economy where it's cool to exit, so to leave your company as soon as possible, as soon as it's profitable. And other positions on the panel were saying, shouldn't we make it easier for startups, because we really need this boom in our economy to be tax exempt in the first years of their existence, etc. And I made myself a little unpopular on the panel, saying, well, I'm self-employed myself, as much as I want all these benefits, but at the same time, why should we benefit a small high-tech company, probably led by pretty elitist say white kids over the Turkish grocery store at the corner? Or why should we encourage this kind of entrepreneurship, which really doesn't look so much at the side of the responsibilities? Do you think this is a fair comparison? Like, would you say that this kind of culture that we're seeing bred there is also being is also influencing small and medium companies and the way we're designing sort of a new economy?
So first of all, I think entrepreneurship by itself is great. I mean, with the rule, you take the loss. And if you fail, and you failed because whatever, you had bad luck, made a bad decision, but you're not like failing like a lot of them failed really. Because let's say we have with other parameters. And then once you have like a startup culture, there's a difference if you run a startup culture with 2-3 people, or if you run a startup culture company like I think Uber is the example at the moment, where you have like thousands of employees and you're still being an asshole, and give like all the room for like being a little asshole if you're like barely surviving with 2 people, because you on the surviving stage. If you're a corporation, you can't pull off things like that. So certain mechanism, I think the biggest one would be the cultural change. That is say like, yeah, well, if somebody's solidly tried something and failed, happens, right? And you move on, you hopefully learn something about it, but you can give them certain incentives to make it easier for them. And I would even go myself to say like certain regulations, you could treat them differently as like really small company with 2-3 people compared to a company with 500 people, like from whatever regulations with how the employment has to be, or if the office has to, I only know it from Austria. Like in Austria, soon you have like paperwork stacks because you like have to stick to the rules. And they completely make sense for if you have a lot of employees, but if you're like 2 people or 3 people or less than 10, it might be different. So on the one side, I encouraged it. On the other side, I used to be there, and I'm not that big fan of like how they think they can deal with that making like this exit game. Because this exit game, it's not anymore about to build a company or build a product. It's basically you build your exit. And that frames it completely different. So it's like, right now I think you see it with the ICOs where you make it's like a multi-level marketing game that used to be the startup scene in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then like after financial crisis shortly again, where it's like booming and everybody's like getting money for nothing. We don't have a product, but we are shiny. That's different. I don't think it's like the classic point of entrepreneurship. And I think it's like this. What was lost here is like you had in Germany the rheinischen Kapitalismus.
The Rhinian capitalism?
Yeah. And it basically you took care about, you had a bank, you took care about like your local stores, and even didn't know the local stores over the time, and they knew that they have to take care about like this local facility. Then in the 80s it started out that they have to make more money because Manhattan was being really profitable, so they switched the business model of making also more money, and then the local businesses didn't get any money because it's like boring business. That's the same thing, like banking by definition is completely boring. I mean, as you land it at 3, you get it out at 6, and at 3 you go golfing. That was the rule. There was no, I think, for everybody involved, interested in that, there's The Big Short explaining it so beautifully.
I agree, that's a great film.
How this, like, it has to be boring in a sense, because then it's solid. And what happened then is like as with startups, you pile into something as soon as much as possible to have a bigger product, and by the day you have then like the returns, or you don't have the returns, and there's the saying, I will be gone, you will be gone. So it's like the incentives are there that you don't care about the future, because once the effects are there, you already like have your paycheck. And that caused like a lot of this in the financial crisis effects, because everybody was moving on, and like, I don't know what I did 2 years ago. I sold like really houses worth nothing, too bad. And that was not just a single person, it was like the whole culture. That was also industry effect, because at the end of the year, it was only about like what kind of paycheck or bonus you got, because what kind of loans you sold. And this mechanism has to break down. This has to go down to, for startups, when they say, man, you can be in the ICO game, and it may work, it may not work, but don't come along and tell me you have a great product, because your product is basically only to dump in some money to make more money, because you need somebody else who wants to build more money on it. But that's not a product, it's not a service, it doesn't bring anybody anything. So that's a difference, I think, from having a value of being an entrepreneur and not. And it makes sense to finance the value stuff.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of the way you talked about is sort of a point of inspiration for that kind of entrepreneurial culture, rather than
to
a more
make it even bigger,
one.
make a big tax loop. I haven't thought about that.
Are there other questions? Okay, let me come to you first, and I'll be with you after. Sorry, we took so much time.
Yeah.
There are more questions in the room. Here you go.
Thank you. I was just wondering about, I've looked at this area a bit, or covered it a bit as a journalist myself, and talked to a lot of people in the US, and it always occurs to me that there's a lot of hypocrisy both on the EU side and the US side about this issue, because whereas the Irish tax rate is sort of a headline rate, you actually have a lot of other EU countries that are giving all sorts of subsidies that aren't in the headline rate, so the companies are paying even less than those little jagged downward trending lines, and are probably closer to the Irish rate a lot of the time. But also in the US, you have the situation where they could change their tax system to address a lot of this as well, even though they like to complain about all these companies over here. And yet then they, about every 10 to 15 years, they have these big events where they let the companies all repatriate the quote unquote once-off opportunity to repatriate all of those trillions, and then they start stockpiling again. And I just wondered, what's your do you think the US will do anything? I mean, Trump is talking about changing this, which doesn't seem too likely to me, and I never know whether there's really any push for change in the US or the EU. And so, I'm interested in where you see the US fitting into this as well. So
first of all, of course, and I pointed out with the flags that different European countries doing the same thing, and it's a race to the bottom. And just like this branding of the Irish-Dutch sandwich was like there because you had like the IT companies being in Ireland. I think that was Then the second part, I don't know how it will evolve. One thing for sure, Trump will be pro-business, and my guess will be the US will try to get part of that money floating around back to the US with a special deal for sure. And even there's a huge discussion in the US of like lowering the corporate tax rate because of the competition from European Union. And then it gets tricky because by itself, tax rate in the US is like still above 30. So it's way higher, and there's a reason why they complain about it, that in Europe it's lower, but then you have to pay other things in Europe. So at a point you have to level it out. When it comes to Europe, with Juncker, the joke before, I mean, he basically created one of the loopholes in Luxembourg, which is really big from the size. He's still in his office where you could argue if that fit for command when you, on the other side, officially announcing you go after tax loopholes, and you're like, that's an interesting choice. Or spectrum from the one side to the other side. And I think there has to be more push forward coming from different areas. Sometimes you see it from old business or real businesses saying that's not long-term sustainable, and it needs a solution. I mean, with the Panama Papers was the same. If there would be more political will, you could easily solve, I think, bigger issues. But then it's a problem because even Germany and Austria, those who are like, as the colleague said before, being in the party, having an incentive to not closing certain things down because maybe they get less donations, maybe their party members getting pissed. I mean, it's pretty easy when you see like in Germany this year, they didn't open up the transparency register because the business lobby was like out of nowhere lobbying against it, and then it was dead. And I think certain initiatives like this beneficial ownership just has to come from certain countries, and then we have to push forward to adopt it. And then at least we can slowly change or make things a little bit more transparent or better. But it's completely complicated, and it's easy that you always blame the others, either the US, the EU or Ireland, who have like the biggest tax loophole and doing the same thing in your own country.
How long have you been researching and working on all this? Because I've seen you speak before, but I didn't know this was one of your topics.
No, I'm just, so I studied economics years back, and then I always followed like, the financial crisis. For me, financial crisis was like a comedy. Like literally like how bad it was, but it was like I used to live in New York, and had like people who work in the stock market and stuff like that. And it's a sitcom in a really bad way, but if you understand like how they think, it's like so mind-blowing because they have a completely different focus. And that I had yesterday a presentation in Germany. There was like one of the guys who probably would be created tax loopholes creating, and he explained me then like what I wanted to know from the other side. And it's like hacking. I consider it hacking, that you find like this one hole, or he looks at something and is like, there it is, and you would spend like days and not finding it. And when he explains it for the other side, I find that entertaining. So I was watching it, like spent a lot of time over the years watching stuff like that.
Well, I'm very glad that you made this your pet topic, and I'd like to take this opportunity to say hello and thank you to everybody watching us in the stream. So hello to Brazil, and the rest of the gig community and everybody else watching out there. I just got a comment saying great talk from a friend in Brazil, so I thought I'd pass that on to you. If there are no other questions, let's give Walter a big round of applause. For those of you who haven't experienced it yet, you have a short break now, and in that time you could either create your own European passport. If you didn't bring your passport along today, you'll have another opportunity to do that tomorrow, or experience the deep virtual reality that was introduced to us this morning. So an exercise for calmness and deep breathing. In case you're very enraged about the tax situation in Europe right now, this would be a good opportunity to calm down. And otherwise, I would love to see you back here at 4:15 for our closing session today, which is going to be a public and open session on the housing crisis. Thank you very much.